Hi, and welcome to Dear Future Boat Owners. Today we are going to be pickling the Watermaker. Our first step is we're going to gather our tools and equipment. The first thing is we need a big bucket and also a small bucket, which we're going to use for measuring because that one is known to be 1 gallon. There's also a new filter and the instruction manual in case you want to follow along on paper instead of just the video. And then finally the Watermaker service hoses and a storage chemical. Breaking them out of that bag, you can see that there are 2 different hoses with 2 different adapters, and we'll show you where they go in just a second. And also this storage chemical. You can note this is Spectra Storage Chemical 1, or SC1 Spectra Chemical 1 storage compound. You can potentially use another manufacturer's, but Spectra does not recommend it, and it's not that much more expensive to get the real stuff, so get the real stuff. So our first step is we're going to get in here and we're going to do a normal flush. We've done a calibration for how long it takes to flush this system. We've talked about elsewhere. It's about a minute and 20 seconds. So we've set up these valves, the yellow one to the off position. The gray one is down in the run position. We're going to switch it to flush. First, we're going to go down to the bottom of here because at the moment we have a brand new water filter, 5-micron filter in the filter housing. And that means that there's a bunch of air in this system. So we're going to open up this bleed valve by about half a turn. We've also set the output selector to the service position, or the test position. You can see I've led that out here and into this big bucket. We shouldn't actually make any water with that bleed valve open, but it's good to just make sure that you're not putting water some other place in the boat. So we're going to do a normal flush. We'll start the timer, open the valve, turn it on. Now we're getting to the end, so right as the timer comes down to 0, we're going to flip the pump off, close the valve, and we are done flushing. Now the real fun begins. We're going to connect the hoses. I'm doing this one-handed, so I'm going to do it off camera, but this hose is going to attach to that little adapter, and this one is going to attach into this valve once we take this cap off. So here you can see them all hooked up, and just come back here. We've led them into this bucket, which is currently empty. This is where we're going to bring in that measuring bucket because we need to measure the amount of liquid that's about to come out of this tube. Now we're going to come back over here, start flushing again, just on, and we'll watch as we start to spit out fresh water into the bucket. We want to measure out exactly 1 gallon, you know, plus or minus. So I'm just going to wait for this guy to fill up. Spectra thinks there's about 2 gallons of water in the system. So in theory, 1 bucket of water here means we have 3 gallons for the full system. So here we're full. So flip that off. Got water coming out my test valve here. So I did what you don't want to do, which is I let this little hose flip out of the bucket, and so of course I spilled a bunch of water. So just be careful. These guys are shorter than they ought to be for where I've put the bucket. Okay, you could be better and just put the bucket over closer, but it's harder to film that way. All right, now we've got our water. We're going to dump our SC1 in there. Whoop. Just the powder, not the bag. And we're going to give it a good stir. All the crystals aren't going to dissolve, but that's okay. They'll just kind of get filtered out by a pre-filter, because from this black tube, we're going to go into the front of that pump housing, and from there through that 5-micron filter and into the system. And so all the chunks will end up in the filter rather than in the rest of the system. So yeah, we'll get more and more water that'll dissolve more of these as you go. The reason that you get the water this way, rather than just filling up the bucket, is that this way it's gone through the carbon filter. We like to always do the services on the Watermaker using water that we've made with the Watermaker, so that we're sure there's no bleach or chlorine in it. Municipal water is chlorinated. You don't know necessarily what you're getting with other shore water, so we like to do this whole process starting with clean water. Then it goes through a carbon filter in the tank, or sorry, in our system, and through that final carbon filter in the Spectra system. So we can be reasonably sure this is chlorine-free water that we're dumping into the Watermaker. I'm emphasizing this because chlorine can really mess up your membrane, and you want the membrane to last a long time. That's why you're doing the pickling in the first place. Do this right, the membrane should last a long time. This service is going to be good for about 6 months. All right, so that's a reasonable amount of stirring. You can see there's a lot of chunks in there, but it's going to get a really good agitation from the machine as we get in there. So now we've got to make sure we've got this, which is now our input valve, really nicely tucked in there. And this one is going to be output, so it doesn't matter so much. We're going to come over to these valves, and we're going to switch here up to the service position. So you can, maybe you can see there's an arrow at the top of this valve. This is the only time you go in from there. So that's our main thing. We'll just flip the pump on. All these guys will start jumping around, but we'll start sucking water out of here. The other thing that's really important through all of this is that the flush valve, or the bleed valve, stays open. Starting to dump these chemicals into your Watermaker can really damage the membrane if you try to do this under pressure. So the bleed valve keeps the pressure down at the feed pump pressure and not the higher Clark pump pressure. So you can see it started to circulate. You've got a bunch of crystals just kind of sitting there at the bottom, and that's fine. They'll just slowly dissolve as we mix the fresh water that's in the Watermaker with the compound water that's in here. So to get that mix going, we're just going to leave this for about 20 minutes, I believe. 10 minutes. Consulting with the manual here. So we'll set our timer for 10 minutes. And just leave this unattended. You'll hear as you go that the pumps can kind of sound a little bit crunchy. What's happening is that these little sprinkly bits are sometimes getting sucked up into the tube and going through the pump. And when it does, the pump just kind of grinds them up and yeah, it makes a little noise doing it. So it's nothing to worry about. You know, maybe it's not great for the surface, but it's Spectra at least didn't warn about it, and it hasn't seemed to cause us any troubles. We're almost done here, so just a couple notes along the way. If that black hose pops out, it's going to suck in air, and that's okay. The system's designed to bleed out air. You just want to make sure that if it happens right at the end, you make sure you run the thing for a couple more minutes just to make sure that that bleed valve or that all the air has bled out, because you want the system to be full of the storage chemical, not full of storage chemical plus air. The other thing is that this you can watch the water coming out of here. Maybe, yeah, see how it kind of jerks a little bit every time the pump switches directions. That has a certain tendency to make these tubes jump, and if you're not around here watching, they can just jump out and start spewing water all over the place, and that can really ruin your day. So just, you know, this is kind of boring sitting here for 10 minutes, but you got to do it to make sure that you don't lose your water and flood your boat. All right, so coming down to 0 here. It's our 10 minutes. So just hop over here, flip that switch off, and it's time to drain out these hoses. All we're going to do is just disconnect them. I'm going to try and work as much liquid out of them, just kind of siphon wise to try and keep it from spilling as I can. And then we'll hang them outside to really dry off before we put them away. All right, so we got the hoses off. We're going to remember to reconnect the old hoses. So this is your output here. Now it just pushes in. Way easier to do with 2 hands. All right, so I'll do that off screen in a second. And then remembering to put the cap on the service valve here. And in the process, we've spilled a bunch of water, so we're gonna remember to clean that up. It's okay, this is a basically waterproof compartment, even where it looks like wood over there that's sealed with epoxy. And so then the last step, leaving all of these in their off position, is just to change that filter. So we're gonna take our wrench, go down there, open her up, hand now. And this is also going to dump a bunch of water in there that we're going to have to clean out afterwards. Maybe just to catch it, we'll leave a rag right underneath it. All right, take that guy out. This is a good time to give this guy a good soaping out and cleaning with a good brush. So we'll just get that all soaped out, wash it. So that's all cleaned out, rinsed, very well rinsed to get all that soap out, and maybe more importantly, dried. And we're gonna put a brand new filter in that housing. Another thing we might do around this time, except I already have recently, so I'm not going to right now, but this O-ring here likes to get lubricated with silicone. That keeps it from binding too early and failing to seal when you slip it back into the enclosure. But again, it's done pretty recently, so I'm not going to do it right now. Sometimes we reuse these filters. I'm a big fan of rinsing them, drying them out in the sun, and using them again. And you can see over there I've got some that have just had 1 or 2 uses and are totally fine. But right now we're going to store it for potentially a long time, and so we want to use a really clean filter. If I was just pickling it because I'm going away for 2-3 weeks, maybe I'd reuse one, not worry about it so much. But for a longer time, you have a lot more time for stuff to grow. Even though you're putting it away dry, you're probably going to get a little bit of dripping from that fixture up there at the top. And so it's not going to be perfectly dry. And so you just want it to be as clean as possible, so that you're mostly letting that storage chemical inhibit the growth of anything nasty. All right, so last things. Remember, we have actually clipped this guy back together, put this valve back on, tightened this down nice and tight with the wrench. It's an unpleasant surprise to come back and find you haven't actually tightened it down. So be kind to your future self. Clean out any water that's spilled in the bottom, just because standing water is gross and tends to smell bad, so you don't want to do that to yourself either. And finally, most important, record what date you did this, because from this day you have 6 months of protection for the Watermaker before you have to either do this again or hopefully just do a normal flush and get go through the startup procedure in the book and get back to making water and exploring the world. This has been Dear Future Boat Owners. I hope this helped, and I hope that Villa is treating you well and that you're having a lot of fun.